articles out there are actually good articles to use. And that we're really looking at the types of information provided in our articles and looking at the methodology of the articles to ensure that if it is essentially research, that the research is doing what it says it's going to do. And specifically in this context for this course, that it actually supports your innovation, okay? And for this course, we do have a 7-level model of evidence, and this is found on page 28 in your course. And really what our evidence level model here, it's how we critically appraise the quality and strength of the articles for your assessment. And our level ones are the highest strength that we can have. And our level ones are our meta-analyses, our systematic reviews, integrative reviews, and national practice guidelines. The level twos are the randomized controlled trials of the experimental studies. Our level threes are our quasi-experimental studies. Our level fours are non-experimental studies. Our level fives are metasynthesis, or they are systematic review of qualitative studies. Our level sixes are single qualitative studies, and our level sevens are expert opinions, okay? So this is the way that we categorize or appraise the quality and strength of the types of articles that we choose for that's going to support our innovation. And if you think of this hierarchy, if you think of it like a pyramid, the very top is the very top is the tip, and our level ones fit at the very tip of the pyramid, where our level sevens fit at the very bottom. So if we think about the tip of a pyramid, right, it's very small compared to the bottom. That's kind of how it is for our strength of evidence in these types of studies. Our level one strengths that are out there that have been done, they are a very small and minute amount of those types of articles compared to all the expert opinions out there, okay? So our level 7 is at the base of that pyramid. There are millions of expert opinions out there, okay? And then level 6s with that next strength, that's one ring up right from that pyramid. Those are our single qualitative studies. You know, there's a bit less of those than our expert opinions. Then our level 5s, which is our systematic reviews of our qualitative studies or metasynthesis. Then our level 4s, then our level 3s, level 2s, level 1s, okay? So if you kind of think of that strength and how many articles are out there, it kind of reminds you of a pyramid, so to speak, okay? So again, this is on page 28 in your course of study, but as you see, our levels of evidence model doesn't really tell us much, right? Like it gives us the strength of evidence, like what level it's going to be, which is in Roman numerals, and it gives us our evidence hierarchy, and it might give you a type of study, specifically our level 4s are non-experimental. As you see, there's different types of non-experimental studies along with different types of level 7 expert opinions. But this really doesn't tell us much, right? So what you have to do then is you have to use the navigation tool, because it's going to give you a lot more information within this flowchart to be able to look at your specific article to determine what the strength and hierarchy is, okay? Okay, any questions about the hierarchy or our evidence leveling navigation tool? Okay. The other item that you also have to be able to use is the recorded cohort. So we should be familiar with that since you're starting on the second assessment, because you did have to watch it for the e-portfolio. If you're just starting the course, please know that it is a requirement of the e-portfolio to watch that. So that breaks all of these articles down a little bit more, or excuse me, not articles, but our levels down a little bit more in detail, going over that. Those, okay. So, at this point, would you all like to go over a couple of the articles? And did you all have a chance to look at the articles that were sent in the email? Okay, so Jana did not have a chance. Did anybody have a chance to review those articles?
Looks like Shelley said yes. Shelley, which articles were you able to look at?
Oh, Shelley wanted to do an example. Okay. So then I take it nobody was able to review the articles prior to this. I know Janet had said no to that question. So, okay. Janet, it should have been in the email that you got when you registered for the cohort initially. Down at the body of the paragraph for that email, it gave you 4 examples to review, or 4 references to review prior to coming to the session. So you would have received it the day that you enrolled. But that's okay. So what we'll do is, first off, I'll ask, before we get into some examples, well, already asked that. Do you all have any questions about that? So that's fine. So that's okay, Janet, no worries. So let's look at this article. So this article is called Clinical Nurse Specialist Perceptions of Transitioning into a Rural Community-Based Transitional Care Role. Okay, so let me get that pulled up. All right, so, okay. So here is our article. No worries, Diane. That's okay. No worries. We'll get you through a couple of these before our time's up. So the biggest thing is, whenever you all go to look at your articles and you're trying to determine strength and hierarchy, the first thing you have to do is you have to read your article. You have to do a very thorough read through first. Okay, that's the most important step. So you're going to read this article thoroughly from the beginning to the end. Then, once you've read the article and you have an understanding of what that article is about, then that's when you're going to use the navigation tool. Okay? So you're going to start out with the question, is it research? Okay? So if we read the difference between research and expert opinion, then research, it has some criteria that it has to meet in order for it to be considered research. So typically, if it's a single study, and a single study means that they are using participants, or so human subjects, or they're using data from human subjects or some type of data within within the paper. So if it's a single study, then typically that single study has to have institutional review board or IRB approval. Okay. If it does not have IRB approval, then it's probably not research. Okay. And they will usually always put that in somewhere in your paper. A lot of times it's under the methodology section. We've had it also at the end of the paper, like in footnotes. We've seen it many different places, but you will usually have some type of statement in there for IRB. And then you may also see it be called ethics committee or ethical approval, or even I've had it called that it adhered to the Declaration of Helsinki, which is the actual name that all of that does for it's a statute essentially for ethics approval. So it really what IRB and ethics approval is that it's a statement that provides protection on human subjects. So if you use human subjects or if you use data from human subjects, all of that information has to be protected, okay? And that's why it goes through an ethics committee or IRB or it has ethical approval, okay? So sometimes you may even see that IRB was waived because it didn't put the participants at risk, and that's okay. They will still say that it went through the IRB process, but that it was just waived. But that's it. That's okay. Sometimes you will see that as well. A lot of times, your quality improvement projects will have that information and say that the IRB was waived because it didn't have, data was not from human subjects, or the way that they did the research was not going to prove to be harmful for those participants. Okay. The other things that you're going to have is you're going to have a research question. You will usually have an aim, a purpose statement, or a hypothesis. You'll have a methodology section that shows you where you're going to, it'll talk to you about how the participants were selected. And then you'll usually see what type of findings they found as well, how the data was collected, the participant, the sample selection, and then the results of the actual study itself. If it's a review, usually a review is where they look at articles to support whatever it is they're trying to study. And so they will do a review, kind of what you're doing with finding your 5 articles. You are essentially doing a review. And so a review is where they go to the literature and they look at all different types of articles that adheres to a specific research question, aim, or purpose that they're trying to look at, okay? And they'll usually give you a detailed analysis of how the studies were selected and then analyze and synthesize all of those articles, okay? So that's usually what research. Expert opinions, you usually have different types of expert opinions. So it's your job, if it is an expert opinion, you actually have to dig a little deeper and figure out, like, your expert opinions typically don't tell you that they're expert opinions. You're going to be looking for keywords such as quality improvement project, or that they did a scoping review, or that they did a literature review, or a narrative review, okay? Even if they do give you those keywords in your article, then our hierarchy would be, it's going to be an expert opinion, okay? And under expert opinion, we do go into a bit about quality improvement, because quality improvement projects, and you all are probably familiar with quality improvement projects, they do look a lot like research. That's where you're doing a little project or a study on a specific unit of your hospital to see if something you want to implement works, right? So you may have, you may be doing it on one floor of the hospital and comparing it to a different floor that did something different, right? But because it is like a local or institutional level, and it is a QI project, they usually don't go through that IRB process, or that IRB process is waived. So usually anytime you see the word quality improvement or a QI project or the word project, it's going to be a level 7 expert opinion. Okay. So let's go back to our article. And Janet, you had a question. So we do evidence level 2 for all 5 of the scholarly sources you provide. Yes, that's correct. You're going to appraise all 5 of your articles for strength and hierarchy. And that's going to come in section E1, and we have a table for you in your template to fill out with all of that information. So let's look at this article. All right, so the first thing you're going to do is you're going to, again, read your article. Most of these articles will provide a little intro for you. They'll give you some background information. And then they're going to go into methods, right? So here we have a methodology section. Usually the paragraph right before the methodology section will usually either tell you their purpose, aim, or their research questions, okay? So let's look at this paragraph here. So we see, and I hope you all can see this okay. So we see here in this paragraph, it gives us a purpose. The purpose of this study was to understand the experiences of nurses making the role transition from CNS hospital-based into TCN roles community-based. Our specific aims were to describe the TCN's perceptions regarding their role, training, and organizational support. Okay, so just by reading those 2 sentences, does anything stick out to you or makes you go, Do you see any keywords here that makes you think, oh, this is what they're looking at, based on what you already know? Do any of these words look familiar? And if not, that's okay. Let's just move on then. So under methods, we have a design. They say a qualitative descriptive design was used to explore perceptions of the CNS who transitioned into a TCN role. Institutional Review Board was approved by the study site before the start of any research-related activity. Okay, so to answer our first question in the tool, is it research? Based on what we know already, could we consider this research? So Janet says yes. Does anybody else say yes? Or does anybody say no? Diane says yes. Okay, the yeses have it. So because it said it had IRB approval, yes, it would be considered research, okay? So now we can go to our next question. So we've answered one question on our tool. So now our next question is it a single study or some type of review? Okay, so remember, do you remember what review is? What we talked about, what a review is? Would you consider this a single study or would you consider it a review? Based on what we learned about earlier. So Diane thinks it's a single study. Does anybody else agree or disagree? Janet thinks it's a single study. So yes, you all would be correct. It is a single study. And the reason it's a single study is because it has participants in it, right? So if we go back to this article, participants were recruited from a small community hospital in Vermont. And that's the whole reason it went through IRB approval. Okay, so let's go to our next question. Is it quantitative? Well, we haven't really talked about quantitative yet, right? So let's see what quantitative means. And off the top of your head, what does quantitative mean? What do you know about the word quantitative? Numbers, yes, absolutely. Quantitative has to do with numbers, volume. Okay, so great job. Quantitative research designs are all about measurement. So they either use participants or data sets, right? So we do have participants, right? And then quantitative studies are interested in knowing the relationship between variables under study. The data in these studies are collected using some type of tool. They will either do a survey, a questionnaire. They may even do some type of intervention where they're looking between a control group and an intervention group. They may do an experiment where people are randomly put into the control group or intervention group. And then the results are statistically analyzed. They'll have convenient sampling or a random sampling, and they'll present the data in tables, charts, graphs, which is full of numerical data, right? Because we said quantitative has to do with numbers, okay? The big thing to know about quantitative research is that if something exists, it can be measured. It is objective, okay? So we're looking to quantify things or to count. And the big thing, you're going to have statistics and numbers, okay? So let's go back to our article. So let's look at their methodology and what they did, okay? So each participant was assigned a unique identifier code to protect confidentiality. Interviews were scheduled at mutually agreed upon dates and times. Data were collected via in-person interviews using a semi-structured interview design. The interview guide was reviewed and critiqued by 2 members of the research team and included 17 open-ended questions with probing questions. Each interview was conducted by a principal investigator, audio recorded, and lasted between 45 and 60 minutes. So does this look like they did some type of quantitative research? We can go even a bit further and said all interviews were described and transcribed verbatim. These themes were compared and discussed. So if we go back to our collection tools, did they use a survey or a questionnaire or some type of intervention or experiment? How did our researchers collect data in our article? Did they do a questionnaire or did they do a interview? Yeah, Shelley, they did an interview. Yes, good job. They did interviews. Okay. So quantitative research, right, has to do with some type of survey. You know those Likert surveys where on a scale of 1 to 10, how do you like this product? That's a survey. That's a type of survey. Questionnaires can also be the same, where you're filling out how much you like something or multiple choice questions, things like that. So did we see any of that for their study? No. Right, right. So can we call this a quantitative study? No. Okay. So let's go look at our tool. And get it back up here. So our tool, if we say no, it is qualitative. Let's look at what qualitative research is all about. So of course the opposite of quantitative is qualitative, right? Qualitative research is subjective. It's always from the perspective of the informant or research participant. It uses semi-structured interviews, focus groups, content analysis of narratives, open-ended interviews, or participant observation to collect their data. Does any of that look familiar? And here's another thing. The data and analysis will result in to identify themes. Right. So, going back to our article, they did open interviews, and then here under design, they say a qualitative descriptive design. there's no right or wrong answer right to subjective information because it's all based on a person's thoughts or feelings, okay? So then, if we go back to our tool, if we do say it's qualitative, then we choose level 6 qualitative study. So this article is a level 6 single qualitative study. So any questions about our articles or about that process of using the tool? Okay. Do you all want to go through another one? Okay, so let's look at this one. So, our article is titled Levels of Innovativeness Among Nurse Leaders in Acute Care Hospitals. Okay? So, the first thing we're going to do is we're going to read our article, and we notice there's an introduction to this. They give us a little bit of background information. Now, this article does a little literature review, and you will see that articles and research may actually give you some background information about what is already known about the topic. And that's normal, okay? Don't let their literature review confuse you with their study and what they're trying to do for their study, okay? But we have to look on, right? We're going to methodology. And so, going back to our research question, is it research? What's the first thing we got to look at and look for? Does anybody remember what we're looking for? Did it go through IRB? Absolutely. So that's the first thing we're looking for. So we have a method section, and look above the method section, right? It gives 2 research questions was addressed. So this is exactly what we're trying to address in this article. What is the level of innovativeness in nurse executives, and what are the differences in levels of innovativeness? We have this method section starting out. Procedure for data collection. Permission to conduct the study was obtained from the appropriate institutional review board. Okay, so we have IRB. So then, do we say this is research? Yes, perfect. Now, what's our next question? Is it a single study or some type of review? So how would we answer that? Are we using participants or are we using articles? Participants, right. Okay, great. So we have participants, and the way that we know this is right here. A minimum sample size of 64 participants was determined to be necessary to detect differences between groups, and a result. Our results. A total of 182 participants responded to the survey. So we know that this is participants, so we do say this is a single study. So what's our next question? Our next question is, and if we go back to the tool, in case you do not remember, is it quantitative? Now, if you remember from our chat a while ago, what constitutes us being quantitative? What are we looking for? And let's go. A survey. Janet says, yes, a survey. And so let's see what they did. And we get that in our procedures for data collection. So it says the survey was open for 4 weeks. An instrument. The scales for measurement of innovativeness was used to measure 5 categories of innovativeness. The instrument, it gives gives us a little background. They use a 7-point Likert scale, okay? And then they give us information about our scale used, okay? And then for the survey, they developed 12 questions and background data as well. Okay, so then do we say that this is quantitative? Yes, okay, perfect. Now we got to go down a little further to where we haven't been before, okay? So our next question is it some type of experimental study? Okay, so we haven't looked at this, so let's open it up. So now we're going to read about what is experiment versus non-experimental, okay? So when you're looking at the differences between experimental and non-experimental, you have to think of the word intervention, okay? So did the researcher introduce an intervention, or did they implement something to see if there was an effect of the intervention on the sample study? When you think about interventions, the easiest way to think about interventions, the examples that I tend to give students, is think about our medication trials, right? Our medication trials are usually randomized control trials where you have an intervention group, which is a medication group, right? You have a control group, which is the placebo group, and they're looking at the differences between the effects of the medication, right? Okay. So if there isn't anything implemented, then it has to be non-experimental, okay? So we read the differences between here. Experimental studies, randomized controlled trials is where the sample is randomly put into either the control group or the intervention group. The quasi-experimental studies, that's usually where they still have an intervention group and a control group, but they do convenient sampling. Okay, those participants are conveniently selected to go into one of the two groups. That's the only difference between an experiment and a quasi-experimental, okay? You go on down to non-experimental studies. So we have surveys, questionnaires, instruments to collect data. They usually analyze data and report the results. And then we have non-experimental studies example. Keep these keywords here in mind while you are looking at your articles, okay? If you see that it's a retrospective study design or a case study design or a cross-sectional study design, a cohort comparison or prospective or descriptive or a correlational single study design, if any of that is in that methodology section, then it's going to be a non-experimental study, okay? So let's go back to our article, and just by what we know, let's look here. We use a cross-sectional descriptive design with comparisons across groups. So are we going to call this experimental or non-experimental? And Janet has the answer, non-experimental, yes. And here, keep the keywords, right? Even if you didn't know anything else and you hadn't looked any further, cross-sectional and descriptive, right, are two of those key words from our types of non-experimental studies. Descriptive, cross-sectional, okay? So we go back to our tool here, and if we say, is it some type of experimental study? We're going to say no, right? Then we're going to choose level 4 non-experimental, where level 4 is our strength and non-experimental is our hierarchy. Any questions about that article? Do you have any questions about the articles that you have found so far, now that we've talked about this a little bit? Do you all want to do one more? I think we have time for one more. Okay. So let's look at a little bit different article. So just by looking what I have on the screen here, right? And thinking about what we've talked about tonight, what are some key things that point out to you, like that stands out in your mind? Just by looking at what information I have here on the screen. Okay, Shelly says overview. Okay. What else do you notice? David says systematic review. Yes, that's the key. The key thing. And so an overview and then systematic reviews. Those are the big keywords. Also review article. Okay, because remember, if you remember right, you either are going to be looking at participants, right, or you're going to be looking at some type of review. Okay, so let's look at what they're doing. And yeah, Diane, you are correct that there is an intervention being done, right? And that's part of what we're looking at. So if we go back to our tool, right, and we remember what it says about what constitutes as research, so I'm going to scroll up. Would this be considered research, this article? And we may need to go back to it just for a second, and let's look at it. So the abstract kind of tells us, it gives us a method, it gives us a result. But let's look for our key headings in this, okay? So we're looking for a methodology or a method section. We're looking, and we do have a method section, right? They tell us the databases, they tell us the search strategy. So we have a methodology. So let's go on down. They even give us a data collection and quality appraisal. They give us a results section. Okay. So would we consider this research? And so, and Shelley says there's no IRB. And you are probably correct in that there's no IRB, and I'm going to see if they even mention that here. A lot of times, your articles like this, if it is a review of articles, it doesn't necessarily have to have IRB approval, because if you remember, IRB approval is only required if they are using human subjects, okay? So a lot of times, these reviews are already looking at articles that have been through that process, okay? So you won't necessarily see IRB through this. And sometimes we have seen some of the authors say that it went through IRB and it was waived because they were looking at articles. Sometimes they will include there, but a lot of times these types of reviews will not, okay? So I will agree that you all said, yes, this is research, so we're going to go with that. Now, our next question is, of course, is it a single study or some type of review? And of course, we're going to go with a review. So, is it a level 1 or a level 5? So that's what we have to differentiate between next. So, when you go to our types of reviews here, it's going to give you the differences between all of our level 1s. And so our level 1s include a meta-analysis. Usually meta-analysis are all quantitative articles and usually are always randomized controlled trials. Systematic reviews are all quantitative articles, and integrative. Integrative reviews are high-level studies, but they include quantitative as well as qualitative studies. Okay? And then our level fives, those are our meta synthesis. And you may remember telling you all at the beginning when I was going through the hierarchy. So level 5 meta syntheses is often called a systematic review of qualitative studies. So they're doing a systematic review, but all of the studies that they're going to use are qualitative, okay? So you may see that word systematic review of qualitative study, or you may see it called a meta-synthesis. Regardless of whichever way it is, if it uses all qualitative studies, it is a level 5 meta-synthesis hierarchy, okay? So going back to our article, okay, so let's look at the methodology here. So our methods is only systematic reviews who evaluated the chlorhexidine for oral health care in patients were included in this overview. And most of the time your level ones will follow this PRISMA guideline, which is the preferred reporting items for systematic reviews and the meta-analysis. This is the way that they search for and develop their article, and the way that they look and critique the actual articles that they're using, okay? So a lot of times your high level ones will use these PRISMA guidelines. They do tell us databases and search strategy. So if you look at this is very detailed. They tell you exactly what they use for their criteria. They tell you here exactly how they included their studies to be included, how they found their studies to be included. And then this table gives you all of the search terms that they used, okay? Then they even tell you how they collected the data from the articles and then how they did a quality appraisal, okay? And then you'll even see like this flow chart here of how they narrowed down their articles for this review. The big thing to know about systematic reviews, right? So if you remember at the beginning, I said our hierarchy is kind of like a pyramid, where your level ones are at the very top, at the very tip top of the pyramid, right? There aren't as many as expert opinions. This flow chart of the selection process is why, essentially. Because when you start developing these systematic reviews or these higher level reviews, you may find hundreds, if not thousands of articles that might meet your criteria, and then you have to narrow all of these down. Look, they had 572 records to identify first, and then after going through all 572 articles, they came down to 16 that actually met their inclusion criteria. Level 1 articles do not, or let me rephrase that. Level 1 articles take a lot of time to write. This is not a process where this is going to take a couple of weeks to do. Usually these systematic reviews take months, if not up to a year to complete, okay? That's why there's not as many level 1s out there as there are expert opinions, okay? Just because of the rigorous methods that they use to write this type of research paper, okay, or this article. So as you see, we do have a results section, and I want you to pay attention to this results section. Not necessarily this page because there's not a button, but look at this. There's a table here, and then what do you notice here on this page that we're looking at? What stands out to you here? Numbers, yeah. There's lots of data, right? Yeah, it's a lot of data. Most of your level 1s, your systematic reviews, some of your integrative reviews might have this in there if they're talking about their quantitative, but your meta-analyses as well, they're going to give you a lot to you while you're reading it, okay? Um, so just know this is kind of what you would see in a systematic review. And then the big thing you want to take home is the discussion, because the discussion section kind of just narrows down what's talked about in the results section to make it more palatable to us that may not know what all those numbers mean, right? So, okay, so going back to our differentiating between types of review, what would you call this article? Anybody want to take a guess? Level 1, Janet says yes. Level 1, and then what's our hierarchy name? Well, it would be one below that. Systematic review is what this is. So we would go with level 1 systematic review because it's an overview of systematic reviews. Meta-analyses, it would be if they said in their method section, let me find it again. So if the methodology here had said, so see, they said this overview of systematic reviews was developed in only systematic reviews. If they had said only RCTs who evaluated the chlorhexidine for oral health care was included in this, then if they included all randomized control trials, then it would have been a meta-analysis. And they usually will tell you if it's a meta-analysis. Now, some systematic reviews will include a meta-analysis, and you can put both of those. Because sometimes it'll say, here's the title, meta-analysis and systematic review, where they're doing both of them. And that's okay to put both of them if it's in the title. But usually you do want to differentiate in regards to whether it's an integrated review, whether it's a meta-analysis, or whether it's a systematic review. But if it says it's both a systematic review and meta-analysis, then you can include both of those as your hierarchy, because that would be appropriate. Okay, and we only have about 4 minutes left. So any questions about anything? We do not have time to go over another article, but hopefully you can take what you've used tonight and what you've learned and apply it to your articles. The big thing about this is make sure you read your articles fully before and understand what they're talking about. Pay attention to those sections. Pay attention to, is there a method section? Is there a result section? Do they have IRB approval? Look for those keywords when you're looking at it. Because if you don't see any of that, and they just give you headings, but the headings don't mention any of those, then it's probably not even research. It's probably just an expert opinion. And there are millions of expert opinions out there, okay? But pay attention to what you're reading. Okay, anything that I can answer for you all. And if not, we are so happy that you came tonight and hope you found this helpful. And if you do have any questions about your articles, feel free to reach out to us. We're happy to help. Oh, you all are so welcome. You all have a great rest of your night.